Hi English teachers, this video is for you. This is part 3 in the series The Stages of a Grammar Lesson, and in this part we'll be looking at guided discovery. I'm Bjarne Vonsil and I've been a teacher, trainer and self-taught tutor for 25 years. In part 2 we looked at clarifying grammar through situational clarification, but there are many other ways of clarifying grammar that involve students more, and one of these is guided discovery. So what is guided discovery? Well, it's an inductive technique that leads students to discover the meaning and the form of the grammar. It actively involves students in the learning process, and the teacher's role is merely to facilitate that this process occurs. So what happens? Instead of the teacher explaining the grammar by giving rules and isolated examples, the students discover the grammar by themselves. So how does this work? While in situational clarification, we set the context using pictures and anecdotes, as we saw in part 2. In guided discovery, we need to use listening or written texts to contextualize the grammar. I'll show you an example from a course book, and I chose to use a course book because they so often use guided discovery for clarifying grammar. Unfortunately, teachers often fail to see this. So this is a guided discovery task. Let's have a look at it. Unfortunately, what too often happens is that the teachers don't know what guided discovery is and don't use guided discovery tasks like the one we have here on the left, the way they're meant to be used. Instead, they tend to clarify the grammar through explanations and examples first, and then use the guided discovery task as a sort of confirmation of what they've just taught, almost as a type of add-on. This, I'm afraid, ruins the opportunity for students to discover the rules of the grammar by themselves, and thereby makes the clarification too time-consuming. So let's look more closely at the example. In this task here, this context is set through a listening, but it could be a written task. And after reading or listening, in this case, for the general idea of the text, the students will discover the form and the meaning of the target language through questions about it. In the example we are looking at, two grammatical structures are being clarified and contrasted. So through these questions, here in 2, students come to their own conclusions about the meaning of the grammar, which in this case is the past continuous contrasted with simple past. In part B down here, the focus is to work on the form of the past continuous. The author here, probably rightly assuming the students at this level already know the form of the past simple. So he's focusing on, or she, on the past progressive form. The teacher's role here is to hand over to the students to do the task, and on completion, check if students understood everything correctly. So this is an example of an English book, but of course, you can do it in different ways, creating your own activity. Now, in which situations do we use guided discovery? Let me show you. We use guided discovery typically when we are dealing with more complex grammar and contrastive grammar. For example, when clarifying present perfect versus simple past versus present continuous, or will versus going to. Or standalone complex grammatical structures like reported speech and passive voice. Now let me just make a comment here. There are some students who do not really take much to guided discovery to start with. Why? Because they've been used to their teachers explaining the grammar to them. And they realize that now they have to make more of an effort to discover the language. But very often, or usually, the easiest way is not the most effective. So engage your students, get them involved. And so what are the advantages of involving students in their grammar learning? Well, first of all, they're involved. And if you're involved, you are reacting better to the cognitive process. You understand more. Secondly, you get to discover the grammar, and this is really important, in your own time, giving the students time to digest the information. And thirdly, students have some time to confer with each other, checking with each other if they understood the same thing. And this gives the class also a sense of community. The students are together. And these three things together makes learning more memorable. Now, so let's look at what the stages were that we went through here. So first of all, students will listen to or read a text for the general idea. Secondly, they're giving specific questions to look at language from the text and answer questions about meaning and form, reaching their own conclusions. When this part is over and students have an idea, their own idea of the form and the meaning, the teacher needs to check that they understood it right. And then finally, you can, as a teacher, work on the pronunciation of the target language. Now, if I've done my job here, you will now have a better idea of what are the advantages of using guided discovery, how is it done, and why is it so important to use this technique. In part 4, our next part, we're going to be looking at clarifying grammar again, but this time through a technique called test, teach, test. So follow us. Thank you.